Welcome back to my channel, Bananas for Bikes. My name is Sean, and today is going to be part one in a multi-part series on converting this step-through Trek to a e-bike. So I'm going to walk you through the whole conversion. Now, before we can actually get the e-bike or the e-bike kit installed on this bike, I'm going to walk you through sort of the safety checklist on what I look for, what needs to get fixed, changed, updated, or upgraded in order to allow the kit to function better, as well as what I look for in a bike to make sure that it will make a good e-bike, because not all bikes make good e-bikes. The better the bike is to begin with, the better the e-bike is going to be at the end. Before we actually get into the install, what I look for is preferably a name brand bike. Could be Trek, could be Specialized, could be Fuji. You know, I'm not getting a bike from a big box store. Something like Mongoose or Schwinn or Huffy or something like that. So I'm looking for a bike that preferably is name brand, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. I look for a bike that has a threadless stem. So you can type in Google threaded or threadless stems and take a look at the difference. But preferably a bike that has a stem and a nice threadless stem is going to be an indication of a good bike. I also check the welds, make sure the welds look good. This is a Trek, so obviously the welds are going to be great. If you get a bike that has disc brakes, that's even better. This bike here has rim brakes, V brakes. I would not go with U brakes, so or cantilever brakes. The lever pull on it just isn't good for optimal braking. So disc brakes are better, but rim brakes will do. The wheel size isn't quite as important. This has a 26-inch wheel, which will be able to hold a lot more weight more comfortably than a 700C or a 650B or 27.5. But the wheel size isn't quite as important. Also, what's not really as important is the drivetrain. This is a 3x7, so as you can tell, this bike is probably at least 10 years old. We haven't seen 7 speeds on bikes for a very, very long time. So, but that doesn't really matter because the Bafang kit is going to replace this with a single speed up front, and we'll use the 7-speed cassette in the rear. We don't need a wide cassette ratio in the back because the e-bike kit's going to put out so much power that you'd only shift between 1 or 2, maybe 3 different gears in the back at most. So having a 10 or 11 speed is not important at all for an e-bike conversion. The other thing you want to look for is making sure that you've got mounts. Here we've got multiple mounts on the front and on the rear for rack and fenders, because if you live in a place that's got rain, you're going to want to keep your bike dry and clean. You also might want to haul some gear, have some panniers, commute, grocery shop, whatever it is. The really nice part about having an electric motor is that it allows you to comfortably carry a lot of weight. So you're limiting yourself by not having the mounting points that you might want. So you look for a point up here for the top of the rack and a point down here for the bottom of the rack, preferably 2, so you can run rack and pannier and fender setups, and then also in the front too for a fender setup in the front. That's about it. Tire clearance, brake choice, quality of the welds, the material of the frame, and the mounts, and making sure that it's got a threadless stem. And any local bike shop, most bikes, I don't even know if a bike shop even sells the quilled stems anymore. So you can Google quilled stems. You don't want that. You know, if you're looking at a bike from the 1980s or 1990s or even early 2000s, probably steering away from that. But most half-decent bikes that are $300 to $400 on up that have been made in the last 10 years are going to be of decent quality. So let's take a look at my walkthrough of the bike, how I inspect the bike to see if there's anything else that I need to like upgrade, change, or fix before I put the e-bike kit on, because you don't want to ride a bike that's unsafe. Now, you may not have been into bikes, you know, since you were 9 years old like I have, but if you have a lot of bike stuff laying around, highly recommend these organizational kits. A lot of different companies make them. This is HDX. I got this one from Home Depot. Preferably you'll get ones with the cups that remove from here. But this is really nice because I've got things like extra V-brakes, extra pads. This is what we're going to look at later. So see those little nibbies there, those little nubbies? That's what you're going to look for to determine. If you don't have nubs on your pads, they need to get changed out. So that's what you look for. I've got stuff to change out hydraulic brake fluid, thread lock, dielectric grease for the e-bike kit. I've got cassette removal tools. I've got the Bafang, the tools that you need to install the Bafang kit, right? Because the Bafang kit's not going to come with all the tools you need to install it. I've got extra bells, little doohickeys for installing fenders. I've got extra washers. I've got extra screws, spacers, seat post clamps. I've got these socket to Allen key conversions for my torque wrench, so I can do all the torque specs on the Allen keys. I've got some extra brake pads for disc brakes. So that's your disc brake pad right there. So something like this is going to be really handy to keep all those parts organized, easy to access. And then I also have a large bin off screen that's going to have the big stuff. Stuff like brake levers, brake hoses, seats, my bike shoes, biking gloves, larger tools, wrenches. So that comes in handy too. So let's go and check out some different aspects of this bike to show you what I look for to determine if this bike needs any upgrades before we go ahead and install the kit. So the first thing we're going to look at is the wheels. What we're going to do is we're going to spin this wheel and we're going to see, does it hop up and down or does it wobble side to side? And you can do that by looking at the space between the brake pad and the rim. So if you just trust my judgment on this, what you can see, you see how that gap, that silver gap, that rim gap, it stays about the same as we spin this tire, which means there's no hop. Hop is very difficult to get out of a wheel. It's harder to true out of a wheel than wobble. So if you have too much hop, if you've been doing jumps off of, you know, huge gaps and stuff, and your rims are crumbling, you might need to get a new rim. But for this bike, there's no hop. There's also no side-to-side movement. I'll also check the spoke tension. Just a brief subjective analysis here. They all feel pretty tight, not too much wiggle, which tells me that this rim is good to go. I'll also take a look for those nubbies on the brake pads to make sure that they don't need to get changed out. Now, if you don't have good movement, obviously I'm going to true these up because this side is moving a lot more than this side. That can be done with using these screws as well as other methods I'll walk you through later. But the fact is there's really good movement on this, which tells me that these springs here, these springs don't need to get replaced. So the springs are good, and these lever bars, they never wear out, and the brake pads are good to go. So I don't need to replace these. Now, on Amazon or eBay, you can get front and rear V-brakes with pads and springs for around 30 bucks. So really not expensive at all to replace these things. One of the things you notice is there's a little hole here. Do you see that hole? See that little hole right there? That will allow you to install a fender here. So that's really cool that it has that little hole here. So that tells you that this bike, the company thought this bike out really well. Another thing I'm gonna, that I tried when the bike was on the ground is I looked for the amount of compression and rebound that we're getting out of this. I was getting pretty good movement on this, which tells me that this shock is in good shape. It's not a serviceable shock, but you definitely don't want to have to replace the shock when you spend money on the bike because it's just an expensive part of the bike. It's one of the most expensive parts of the bike. Again, you'll see that this is a threadless setup. It does have a really cool adjustable stem here. Now this stem shouldn't be adjusted vertically like that. There should be some additional room to bring this stem up, taper this forward a little bit. So clearly they want to have a higher bar here. This is just not the best way to achieve it, although it's possible. This has a trigger, this has a grip shift. Grip shifts typically are not found on nice bikes. These are outdated. Most of the time you'll see a trigger shifter, like what we have here on this Trek. You'll have these trigger shifters, some nice V-brakes on this bad boy. But for this bike, it's got a grip shift, so that's really outdated. However, I do know that this bike is at least 10 years old, so what do you expect? However, it will do. It will do for now. You could swap this out for a 7-speed shifter and change the brakes and call it good. But I don't think the person that I'm working on this bike for wants to spend an unnecessary amount of money. So as long as this works, this is good. This will work. Like I mentioned before, it doesn't really matter here. And then I just do the same thing on the back. I spin the wheel and look for hop and look for side-to-side movement. I don't know if you can catch that at all, but there is a little bit of side-to-side movement on this rear wheel. And when I do the test for the spokes, they're relatively taut. But I will bring this rear wheel into the local bike shop to have them true that up. And that's really important because when you're running rim brakes, the truer the wheel, the easier it is to dial them in because you have brake contact on the rim itself. It's not as important with disc brakes. However, you don't really want to run. The longer you run a wheel out of true, the worse it gets, the harder it is to get it back into true. So it's something that's relatively inexpensive and you want to stay on top of. So for me, that generally sums up what I'm looking for. I know the wheels are good, the brakes are good, the brake pads are good. I don't need to worry about the drivetrain because I'm swapping the drivetrain out. You can check out the chain. Now this chain is rusted. I might be able to actually clean this chain, lube it, and it'll be good to go. I might give that a whirl. Otherwise, I'll just buy a new chain. It's probably only about 15 bucks for a new chain, so I'm not really worried about that. I did use a chain stretch gauge on it to determine if it was stretched out or not, which it's not. So this may be rehabable. The cassette in the rear here has some rust on it. I don't know if you can pick that up. It's got some rust on it, so I will take that out, use some WD-40, some degreaser, clean it all up, and get it looking new. That way you don't get rust in the drivetrain. It's not pretty.